She always believed their lives were intertwined by quiet devotion and unspoken understanding, a marriage built on the simple trust they shared. But after Jack Murphy's passing, Helen uncovers a hidden past that shatters everything she thought she knew. A secret rooted in war, a long-forgotten letter addressed simply to her, and a journey for answers that promises to rewrite her entire story. Before we dive into the story, let me know where you're tuning in from today, and if you enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more. She remembered the day Jack Murphy's strength slipped away for good. He had been fading for months, drifting in and out of consciousness in the cramped bedroom they once shared. The medical equipment that filled the space hummed softly. Wires and tubes led to monitors that blinked with green and red lights, measuring the slowing rhythm of his heart. The air in that room felt stale, as if the windows hadn't been opened in weeks. She sat beside him in a small chair, her lower back aching from too many hours spent waiting for words that never came. Their daughter Emily lingered in the doorway, her eyes rimmed with a grief she tried to hide behind practical tasks like rearranging the medicine bottles. Helen had always known her husband to be reserved, but in those final hours, his silence carried a different weight. It was as though he wanted to speak but couldn't form the words, or perhaps he was too tired to try. Every time his eyelids fluttered, she leaned closer, hoping for some final confession, some name or place that would make sense of the tension behind his eyes. Yet nothing came. His breathing grew shallower, and the doctor's subdued footsteps announced that time was running out. Helen still heard the echo of the hospice nurse's voice from that morning. "He might have a few hours. If there's anything you need to say it now." But what could she say? They had been married for decades. They had shared a home, children, birthdays, tragedies. Yet, as she watched him fade, she could not shake the feeling that there was more to him, a side he had guarded fiercely. She wanted to tell him that it was all right, that she understood he kept secrets to protect her. But she didn't understand, not really, and her throat closed around the words she tried to form. His eyes opened one last time. For an instant, she thought she saw a flicker of urgency, as if he were about to reveal something. His lips parted, and his breath rattled. She leaned in, pressing her ear close to his mouth. He managed a sound, a faint syllable, maybe a name, maybe just a breath. She couldn't be sure. Then his gaze slipped away to some distant horizon she couldn't follow. The machines beeped in staccato, and a nurse gently guided her out of the room. By the time the doctor came, it was already over. In the corridor, Emily wrapped her arms around her mother, tears slipping down her cheeks. Helen's own tears wouldn't fall. She felt too numb, too dazed by the sudden finality. Family members arrived in clusters. Some shook their heads in quiet sorrow. Others tried to comfort Helen with murmured words of consolation. But in the center of her chest, she felt only the cold knowledge that Jack was gone, and that the little piece of truth he might have offered in his last breath slipped through her fingers. The funeral came and went in a gray blur. A drizzle of rain fell on the day of the service, gathering in small puddles around the headstones. The casket lowered into the ground, accompanied by the faint rustle of umbrellas. Emily's children clung to Helen's coat, their little faces twisted by confusion. They couldn't quite grasp what it meant to lose a grandfather. Helen stood stoically, nodding at condolences that washed over her in a flood. She kept expecting to wake in the middle of the night, hearing Jack's shuffle in the kitchen, or his voice calling softly for her. Instead, the house remained silent, and that silence felt like a tangible presence, pressing at her from every wall. In the weeks that followed, she packed up his clothes and gave away some of the outdated suits. She found boxes of old baseball cards from his childhood, and a file of carefully clipped crossword puzzles he had collected. The newspaper sections dated back years, as if he had planned to solve them when he found the right moment. That was Jack, always preserving time in little corners, as if he could stretch it just a bit further. Yet something gnawed at her, an itch at the edge of her thoughts. His final, half-formed sound lingered in her memory. She replayed it over and over, wondering if it was a plea or a single word. Maybe Anna, maybe Dresden, maybe something else entirely. She recalled nights when Jack would wake up in a sweat, though he never talked about nightmares. He had served in Germany during the Cold War, that much she knew, and he mentioned the difficulty of those times. But he never elaborated, never shared stories about the men he served alongside, or the locals he encountered. One rainy morning, exactly 3 months after the funeral, she decided to finish clearing out his study. The room had an old mahogany desk scarred with pen marks and an armchair that smelled faintly of tobacco, even though he had quit smoking years ago. A tall wardrobe stood against the far wall, its top shelves mostly unused. Helen pulled a chair over, climbed up with some effort, and opened the cabinet above the wardrobe. Inside, a neat tower of Jack's financial folders greeted her, each labeled with a year and meticulously organized. In the back corner, something else caught her eye. A manila envelope that looked older than the rest, unmarked and slightly yellowed along the edges. Her heart thudded as she removed the folders and lifted out the envelope. It felt surprisingly heavy in her hands, though it was nearly empty. When she peeled it open, a single black and white photograph slid free. The image showed a much younger Jack in uniform, standing beside a woman Helen had never seen, near a rusted checkpoint sign that read, Dresden, 1953. The woman held a toddler in her arms, a boy with wide, solemn eyes, and Jack's hand rested gently on the child's back. Helen stared at her husband's face. He looked confident and at ease. The lines around his eyes suggested a kind of subdued happiness. She flipped the photograph over, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized his handwriting. 5 words, scrawled in black ink. Forgive me for the silence. She read it again, her chest tight. Over the years, she had grown used to his reticence. It was part of who he was. A man shaped by secrets, though she never imagined they ran this deep. She approached Emily that afternoon, wanting reassurance or at least some sense of perspective. Emily's eyes widened as she studied the photograph. She traced the edges with her thumb, then glanced at her mother's face. "Mom," she said quietly, "I don't know who they are. I've never seen Dad mention anyone named Anna. If he knew these people, maybe it was just someone he helped while stationed there." Helen heard the hesitation in her daughter's voice. Emily was trying to protect her, trying to minimize the importance of this discovery. But Helen couldn't push aside the weight of it. That same day, she returned to the study, rummaging behind the bookshelf. A loose panel at the back gave way, revealing a narrow metal box wrapped in a plain cloth. It felt both thrilling and terrifying in her hands. Inside was a single folded letter addressed simply to HM for after. She recognized Jack's handwriting immediately, though it looked more rushed than usual, as if written under pressure. The letter was short, barely a paragraph. "There are things I buried deeper than I should have. Not to lie, but to protect. If you ever find this, go to 17H Lindenstrasse, Dresden. Someone there may still remember. I only ever wanted you safe." Helen's hands shook. She reread those lines, feeling Jack's presence in every loop and stroke of his pen. She recalled how he had always hated writing letters, claiming he couldn't express himself well on paper. But these words seemed deeply intentional. They carried regret and urgency. Despite herself, Helen felt her heart accelerate. Whatever secrets Jack had, they extended far beyond a stray memory of war. There was a child in that photo, a woman standing close, and a mention of danger and safety. In that moment, she realized she couldn't let this go. Not like she had with other mysteries in their marriage. Late-night phone calls he'd dismiss, strange documents in foreign languages that she'd see for a moment before he put them away. This time, there was too much at stake. A small life captured on camera. An entire hidden dimension that refused to stay buried. Emily tried to dissuade her. "Mom, please. It was Dad's past. It happened decades ago. If he didn't tell you, maybe it's because it didn't mean anything, or it's just too painful. Please don't torture yourself by chasing it." But Emily's words only fueled Helen's resolve. She booked the flight without telling anyone, quietly gathering her coat, her passport, and the brittle envelope. She wasn't sure what she would find in Dresden or who might be waiting at 17H Lindenstrasse, but she knew she had to go. The plane ride was a haze of uncertainty. She spent the 8-hour flight staring out the window at clouds illuminated by moonlight, wondering if she was about to discover something that would unravel her memories of Jack forever. She replayed old conversations, searching for any clue she might have missed. Years ago, he had mentioned the thick fog of German winters, the crackle of radio static at night, the hush of streets under Soviet watch. But never a lover, never a child, never anything that would explain a photograph and an apology written in trembling ink. When she landed, Dresden welcomed her with a chill wind. The city bore the marks of its history. Old facades that had been restored to their former grandeur, new buildings standing where rubble once lay, winding streets that seemed to whisper of stories left untold. Helen checked into a small pension near the river. The receptionist, a kind older man, asked if she was here for tourism or family. She swallowed hard and simply said, "Research." The next day, she followed Jack's instruction, walking until she reached Lindenstrasse. Number 17H was a gray, 3-story building with faded window frames and ivy creeping up the walls. She walked up to the front door and knocked. Each rap on the worn wood echoed in her ears like a question. She felt her palms sweating despite the cold. An older woman answered, her pale hair pulled back in a loose bun. She had tired eyes that regarded Helen with caution. Helen hesitated, unsure how to introduce herself. Finally, she held up the old photograph of Jack in uniform. The woman's gaze flickered with recognition. She opened the door wider. Helen stepped inside, the scent of lavender and old paper wafting around her. They sat at a small kitchen table with chipped enamel edges. The woman, who introduced herself as Marta, studied the photograph for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. "Yes," she said, pointing at Jack's face. "I remember him, Jack, but I never knew his last name. He came here often in 1952 and 1953. That was a dangerous time. My sister Anna was too young, too trusting. But he wasn't unkind." Helen felt her throat tighten. She could almost feel Jack in the room, his ghost hovering behind the hush of Marta's words. "My husband," she began, voice trembling. He never told me about her. About a child." Marta looked down at the photograph. "That child was my nephew, Lucas, Anna's son. Jack was close with them, or so I thought. He disappeared, you see. One day he left and Anna, she vanished the next year." A stunned silence hung between them. Marta continued in a measured tone. 1954. She was gone. No letter. No word. The officials came and searched our apartment. Lucas was nearly 4. They said she defected, that she was a traitor. I never believed it. I tried to protect Lucas. The Soviets watched us all. I was lucky they allowed me to keep him." Helen looked at the photograph in her hand, her eyes landing on the little boy. "You raised him," she said quietly, half a question. Marta nodded. "He was like my own child after Anna vanished. The times were cruel, and secrets were the currency everyone traded. We learned not to ask too many questions. Lucas never knew the truth of his mother's disappearance. Then he died in 1989, just before the wall fell." Helen felt something crumple inside her, like a piece of paper collapsing under weight. The child in the picture, Jack's child? Or at least the child of someone he cared for deeply. She thought of all the nights Jack might have laid awake, haunted by the face of a boy he never saw grow up. All the years he carried this guilt. Did Jack keep in contact at all?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Marta disappeared into another room and returned with a thin folder. She placed it on the table. Inside were old documents, Lucas's school ID, a birth certificate with no father listed, and an envelope stamped with faded American postage. It was sealed but never opened, never delivered. Helen gingerly tore it open, her heart pounding. Inside was another photo of Anna and Lucas, and a note scrawled in Jack's handwriting. "I'm sorry I can't come back. I wanted to. I tried. But it's not safe for you or for them. Tell Lucas I never stopped trying." Helen's vision blurred with tears she had been holding in for months. So this was the piece of Jack's life he locked away. A woman named Anna, a small boy named Lucas, a world divided by Cold War lines. His silence, his secrecy, they were more than personal quirks. They were artifacts of a life that demanded secrecy. Marta watched her with a gentle sorrow. Helen felt guilt for all the times she suspected Jack of withholding something merely out of stubbornness. Now she understood that some secrets weighed so heavily they could only be carried alone. I don't know what to say," she managed. "He never spoke of this. Not once." Marta placed a hand on Helen's shoulder. "He was a good man," she said. "He tried to help Anna, but the times were dark. We were all afraid." Helen remained in that small apartment for hours, listening to Marta describe Dresden under Soviet control, the hush of winter nights, the whispered rumors of arrests, disappearances, and forced confessions. She learned that Anna had worked in the Soviet records office, forging documents for those who wanted to flee east or west. She was caught once, questioned, and somehow released. But the risk was always there. Jack, stationed in Germany, had stumbled into her path. They shared information, perhaps more than that. Over time, they grew close. When Helen finally left, the sun had set, and a crisp wind rattled the ivy clinging to 17H Lindenstrasse. She wandered the streets until she found a small park, where children played on modern swings under the glow of street lamps. She recalled the black-and-white photograph of that little boy, Lucas, and pictured him in this same city decades ago. She imagined him toddling around broken cobblestones, too young to know he lived in a zone of global tension. On the flight home, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the child who grew up without a father, her husband, who had tried to reach out but never succeeded, or perhaps never dared. She wondered if Jack had ever been truly free of that guilt. Did he feel it every time he glanced at his own children? Did he see Lucas's face in Emily's eyes? Her mind refused to rest, haunted by images of Marta's pale, stoic face and the documents she presented. Days later, she gathered enough courage to tell Emily everything. They sat at the kitchen table, where Emily once did her homework. Helen spoke in a low, measured tone, explaining Anna's disappearance, Lucas's short life, Marta's unwavering dedication. Emily's expression cycled from disbelief to anger to a kind of mute heartbreak. Her voice cracked. "How could he keep this from us? All those years. We had no idea." Helen pressed her hands together, trying to remain steady. "He believed it was safer this way. For us, for Anna, for Lucas. I don't think he forgave himself for failing them." Emily fell silent, tears threatening to spill. The tension in the room was palpable. They both felt betrayed by the man they loved, yet at the same time, they understood the fear he must have endured. The Cold War wasn't an abstract story for him. It was a personal crucible. Word spread quietly through the family. Some relatives dismissed it outright, choosing to believe Jack was only tangentially involved. Others listened to Helen's account with wide-eyed shock. A few asked for details, wanting to piece together the missing puzzle of Jack's life. But the conversation always ended in a hush, as though speaking of it might stir ghosts best left at peace. Helen, for her part, felt closer to Jack than she had in years. By finally touching this hidden sorrow, she felt she was finally seeing him fully. In the weeks that followed, she found herself drawn to his old study. She polished the desk, carefully removed every item, and dusted the shelves. The photograph from Dresden she placed behind the glass of another framed photo, an image of her and Jack on their wedding day. Now both pictures rested side by side. It felt right that these two parts of his life no longer remained divided. She wanted to honor the reality that her husband had once stood beside a woman named Anna, holding a child who needed him. Emily found it difficult to accept. She asked if Helen felt betrayed, and Helen couldn't lie. A part of her did. But overshadowing that was a deep empathy for the burden Jack must have carried. She remembered the nights he'd slip into bed quietly, as if he didn't want to wake her. Perhaps he couldn't sleep because memories of Lucas kept him awake. One Sunday morning, Helen prepared a small package. She included Jack's unopened letter with the American stamps, the one that never reached Anna or Marta. She added a photo of her and Emily at Jack's funeral, A note explaining that, despite everything, she believed Jack always wanted to do the right thing. She wrote in the simplest terms, "He wasn't proud of the silence. He just didn't know how else to keep everyone safe. I wish it hadn't taken this long." She mailed the package to Marta. Weeks passed, then months with no reply. She didn't really expect one. For Marta, perhaps the story had ended long ago, with Lucas's death and Anna's disappearance. Still, Helen's restlessness lingered. She took to journaling, scouring through Cold War archives at the local history center, volunteering to digitize records. She stumbled across mentions of people who vanished from Dresden in the 1950s, lists of those suspected of defection, coded references in old Soviet files. The name Anna never appeared, nor did Lucas's, but Helen found fragments that mirrored Marta's stories. Entire families uprooted, lovers separated by bureaucratic lines, children lost in the shuffle of East and West. Every new file she uncovered felt like a small piece of global heartbreak. One evening, she attended a recital at a local music hall, a benefit event that highlighted compositions banned during the Cold War. The final performer was a young violinist who reminded her of something Marta had said, that Lucas played violin on the streets of Dresden. After the performance, Helen approached the girl backstage, her heart pounding with the memory of the photograph on Marta's dresser. She pulled out a small envelope with a copied picture of Lucas as a teenager, violin in hand, and offered it shyly. "He played like you," she said softly, her voice catching. The girl accepted it with a polite smile, clearly puzzled, but thanked her. Outside, the wind was cold, rustling the trees in the park near Helen's home. She walked until she found the bench Jack once favored. There, she lowered herself slowly, letting the wind and the night sounds wash over her. She reached into her coat pocket and felt the original slip of paper with Jack's words. "Forgive me for the silence." She had carried it like a talisman, but now, with a soft exhale, she let it drop. The wind caught it, carrying it across the dark grass, out of sight. She watched it go, tears in her eyes, not from sadness but a sense of release. She rose from the bench and headed home. For the first time, the silence she felt around her wasn't crushing. It was simply the quiet of a story that had finally found its place in the open air, no longer trapped in an old envelope or pressed between the pages of the past. She couldn't erase the secrets or the hurt they had caused, but she understood now that Jack had loved more than she ever realized. And in that love lay both the heartbreak of what he couldn't save and the hope of what he passed on. A quiet courage to face the truth, even if it arrived too late. She returned to the house she had shared with Jack, noticing how the light fell across the floor in the late afternoon. Boxes still lined the hallway, reminders of her earlier decision to move. Perhaps she still would, or perhaps she would stay. The ache in her chest had dulled from a stabbing pain to a deep bruise. Emily visited less often now. Her work schedule was busy, and there was a tension between them that neither addressed directly. Helen wanted to bridge that distance, to reassure Emily that Jack's secrets didn't negate the life they had built together. But she also knew that her daughter would need time to grieve the loss of certainty. Helen's nights were filled with half-remembered dreams. Glimpses of Dresden's narrow streets, swirling fog, the faint melody of a violin echoing between stone buildings. She would wake before dawn, disoriented, and sometimes found herself standing in the study, as if guided there by a restless energy. She brushed her hand over the desk surface, recalling how Jack used to lean over crosswords in the late afternoon light. Maybe, in some way, he had found a semblance of peace, knowing that Helen might someday uncover the rest of him, even if he couldn't bring himself to speak it aloud. One morning, a letter arrived, German postmarks. The handwriting was spidery and cautious. Inside, Marta's concise words thanked Helen for sending the package. There was no lengthy explanation, no emotional outpouring, just a short line. He tried to help her. "I believe that. Thank you for understanding." Beneath the text, Marta had drawn a small heart. Helen gripped the paper with trembling hands. A wave of warmth spread across her chest, as if a gentle door had opened. Yet the more Helen reflected, the clearer it became that the quiet that shrouded Jack's story wasn't merely about love or shame. It was about survival in a world defined by lines on a map. She thought of Anna, stepping through a labyrinth of Soviet offices, forging documents to save others. She thought of the risk Jack must have taken by associating with her. She wondered how many times he planned to reveal the truth but chose silence instead, convinced that telling Helen would only place a burden on her heart. When Emily came by later that week, Helen showed her Marta's letter. Emily read it twice, pressing her lips tight. "I'm still angry at him," she admitted, setting the page down. "I can't help it. I wish he'd told us. Even if it was painful, I wish I could have known him fully." Helen understood. "I know. Me too. But he must have believed this was the only way." Emily only nodded, tears in her eyes. Then she surprised Helen by leaning forward and pulling her into a firm hug. In that silent embrace, Helen felt some of the tension dissolve. They remained that way, mother and daughter, bound by love and the hollowness left by Jack's hidden life. Some days later, a distant cousin from out of state called Helen after hearing rumors of another child. Helen hesitated, measuring her words. "We don't know if that boy was Jack's son," she said truthfully. "But there was a child named Lucas he cared about." The cousin pried with questions. Was it an affair? Did Jack lead a double life? Helen's patience wore thin, but she remained calm. She realized people love gossip more than truth. "We only know that a bond existed and it mattered," she said, then ended the call. Alone in the study, she stared at the wedding photo with the Dresden picture tucked behind it. She recalled the feel of Jack's coat draped over her shoulders on chilly nights. Had he thought of Lucas each time he held their own children? Had he felt an unspoken guilt, some primal sense of failing that child across the ocean? The layers of regret and devotion tangled in her mind. That evening, she found herself placing an old map on the desk, one that showed the lines of East and West Germany before reunification. She traced the border with a fingertip, imagining Jack in uniform, crossing from one zone to another, glancing over his shoulder. Fear must have been constant. A single misstep could mean imprisonment or worse. Perhaps Anna had been discovered forging those documents. Perhaps Jack was forced to leave or threatened. The letter indicated he tried to keep them all safe, even if it meant severing contact. As the weeks turned into months, Helen kept volunteering at the local archive. She helped catalog documents from that era, scanning them and labeling digital files so researchers could access them. Now and then, she stumbled on references to foreign soldiers stationed in Dresden. She found rosters with partial names, time-stamped records of those who were assigned to collaborate with local administrative offices. She searched for Jack's name among them, but never found anything conclusive. At times, the absence felt like a quiet validation that the official story had been scrubbed. The deeper she looked, the more she realized how many personal histories had been erased or permanently sealed. There were nights when she lay awake, remembering the hush of the plane as she flew to Dresden. She recalled Marta's voice describing how Anna vanished. She pictured the old envelope with Jack's scrawled apology. She found an odd sense of purpose in that memory. By carrying on his silent confession, she was, in a way, allowing his intentions to be heard. If he had believed secrecy was the only shield, then she, now free from that danger, could unearth the truth without fear of retribution. At times, though, the weight of what she found would press down so heavily that she felt her breath catch. She would sit by the window, trying to push away the flicker of an image. A small boy, fatherless, longing for a letter that never came. She remembered Marta describing Lucas's final years, how he died so young. She wondered if, had Lucas lived longer, Jack might have broken his silence. Would father and son have met one day? It was the kind of question that had no answer, and it left her feeling hollow. Yet the gloom didn't last forever. Helen sensed a slow, cautious growth in her own spirit. She began to see Jack's legacy not just in his silence but in the kindness he showed in that old photograph. He had risked much to be with Anna and Lucas in those fleeting moments. Even though the era's politics pulled them apart, the tenderness in that black and white image was real. It wasn't a betrayal of Helen and Emily. It was an act of a man trying to do right in a world that didn't allow easy truths. One afternoon, As she sorted through the last of Jack's boxes, she found a small note he had scrawled to himself on a scrap of paper, likely a puzzle clue or a line of poetry. All it said was, "We carry the secrets we must." She traced the letters with her fingertip, tears stinging her eyes. It felt like a message from beyond, a private confession of how heavy those secrets had been. Emily came over that same day, her children in tow. They raced around the living room with toy trucks while Emily busied herself in the kitchen. Helen joined her by the stove, offering to help chop vegetables. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the squeals of the little ones. They were the next generation, untouched by the shadows of the Cold War. Helen suddenly felt grateful that life could move forward, that children could run free without a curfew imposed by foreign soldiers or fear of hidden informants. When the meal was nearly ready, Emily leaned against the counter and sighed. "Sometimes I feel like I barely knew Dad," she admitted. "This last couple of months have been disorienting." Helen set down the knife and turned to her. "I think we knew him in the ways he wanted us to. He was still our Jack, still the man who taught you to ride a bike, who collected baseball cards, who insisted on the same brand of coffee every morning." She paused, voice trembling. "He was just more than that, too." Emily nodded, her eyes glassy with tears. "I wish he had been able to tell us," she said softly. "So I could have told him it was okay to have a past, to have regrets." Helen hugged her. "I think he knew in his own way. Maybe he just couldn't bear the risk that came with telling us everything." They set the table and called the children in, the air around them gentler than it had been in weeks. Over dinner, Emily's kids chattered about friends at school, about weekend plans, about cartoons they liked. Helen listened with a certain peace. She felt that, despite the heartbreak, her family was still whole, perhaps cracked at the edges, but not shattered. Later that night, after Emily and the children left, Helen stood in Jack's study, looking at the layered photos in the frame. She placed her palm against it, almost as if she were trying to touch both images, her wedding picture and the hidden Dresden photograph. She thought of everything she now understood, that love can be tangled in obligation and fear, that a secret doesn't always mean betrayal, that sometimes revealing a truth feels like a risk no one wants to take. She closed the study door and walked down the hall, passing the rooms that had once buzzed with her children's laughter. In the quiet hush of evening, she remembered her trip to Dresden, the stillness of Marta's apartment, and the folder containing Lucas's documents. She remembered how the city lights looked from her pension window, shimmering across the Elbe River, a silent testament to how a place can rebuild after destruction. In a way, she felt she, too, was rebuilding, fitting this new piece of Jack's history into her life like a mosaic tile. It might never be seamless, but it could still form part of a beautiful whole. Over the next weeks, she spoke with a few trusted relatives. Most offered sympathy, some expressed shock, and a handful chose to keep their distance, not wanting to tangle with complicated truths. One evening, her sister called and confessed she admired Helen's bravery in going to Dresden. "I'm not sure I would have had the courage," her sister admitted. Helen was silent for a moment, remembering the swirl of emotions that propelled her onto that plane. She wasn't sure it was courage so much as necessity. She simply couldn't bear not knowing. Then came a day when a large envelope arrived, sealed carefully and marked with foreign stamps. Inside was a single letter from Marta, containing a photograph of Lucas at about age 10, smiling shyly at the camera, holding his violin. Marta's note was short. "He would have wanted to know you existed. I wanted you to see him, too." Helen pressed the photo to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. It felt like a completion of some cosmic circle, bridging a gap that had yawned open for decades. She wondered if Lucas ever sensed a father's absence more acutely when he held his violin. Did he ever guess that someone far away worried about him daily? Helen wrote back, sending a note of gratitude. This time, she included a copy of Jack's obituary and a pressed flower from his funeral wreath. She didn't try to fill the note with words that might sound hollow. She just wrote, "I'm sorry for everything he couldn't say. Thank you for sharing Lucas's smile." Seasons turned, yet Helen noticed her longing didn't vanish. Instead, It settled into a quiet acceptance. She found joy in everyday tasks again, pruning her rose bushes, baking bread, volunteering at the history center. The raw ache lessened, replaced by a subtle ache that reminded her of the secrets that had once separated them from a piece of Jack's life. She carried that ache the way one carries a memory of an old injury, never fully gone, but no longer crippling. Eventually, she felt it was time to do one last simple act. She gathered some mementos of Jack, his dog tags, a small journal of scribbled crossword clues, the wedding band he wore, and that old photograph from Dresden. She placed them in a wooden box with a hinged lid, something that looked almost like a treasure chest. Then she added a small note in her own handwriting. He couldn't say it, but he tried in his own way. I hope these memories do him justice. She locked the box and set it in the closet next to a suitcase, not sure if she would ever open it again. Months later, on a brisk autumn day, she decided to visit Jack's grave with Emily. The cemetery felt peaceful under a low golden sun. They walked quietly between the headstones, the rustle of leaves underfoot. Emily carried a small bouquet of late-season blooms, and Helen held a photograph she had copied, one of Lucas in that final year, grown up and wearing a solemn expression. They stood by Jack's headstone, the polished granite reflecting the sky's light. Helen knelt, pressing her hand to the cold stone. She had no speech prepared, no words that could encompass all she felt. Instead, she placed the photograph of Lucas at the base of the stone, tucking it under a small stone so it wouldn't blow away. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I found him." Emily stood behind her, a tear sliding down her cheek. For a moment, the air seemed to still, as if the world paused to acknowledge the completion of a circle. No voice answered, no supernatural sign appeared. But Helen felt a calmness seep into her chest, as though some old wound in Jack's memory finally had permission to heal. They returned to the car in silence. On the drive home, Emily reached over and squeezed Helen's hand. The quiet gesture spoke more than any conversation. Helen's eyes stung with tears, but she smiled. They would never fully repair what decades of secrecy had broken, but they could move forward with the truth now laid bare. The next morning, Helen brewed her usual cup of coffee and found herself flipping through an online forum dedicated to Cold War histories, scanning threads about missing persons, border crossings, and unsolved disappearances. She typed out a careful message, sharing a few details about Anna and Lucas, about 17H Lindenstrasse, about her late husband, Jack, who once tried to do the right thing in a time when right and wrong were often blurred. She didn't expect a response, but it felt good to place the story somewhere public, as if letting the outside world bear witness to a truth she had once been denied. A few days later, there was a reply from a user claiming to be a local historian in Dresden. They asked for more information. Helen wrote back with caution, offering only what Marta had allowed her to share. She wondered if any record of Anna might exist in archived Soviet paperwork or secret police documents. That was all she could do, extend a hand into the unknown. Life continued in its daily rhythms. She vacuumed the living room rug, sorted her mail, grocery shopped. Every so often, she paused to realize how drastically everything had changed since she discovered that manila envelope. The hush of the house no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it was laced with a subtle sense of communion, as if Jack's ghost gently lingered, acknowledging her understanding. Then, one chilly evening, she closed her laptop after reading the historian's latest message. No new information about Anna had surfaced, but they promised to keep looking. Helen smiled sadly, folding the laptop shut. Some stories remain elusive, scattered fragments in old filing cabinets or hidden under layers of bureaucracy. She had learned enough to piece together a narrative of love, risk, and heartbreak. That, she decided, might have to be enough. She pulled on a light jacket and stepped outside, the crisp air biting her cheeks. She walked down the street to the neighborhood park, where leaves drifted in small whirlwinds along the path. She sat on a bench, watching a few children chase each other across the grass, their laughter echoing under the darkening sky. She remembered the photograph of Lucas at 4 years old, a bright-eyed child who grew up under watchful eyes, raised by an aunt who loved him dearly. She thought of Anna's final days, forced to make impossible choices in a city where danger lurked behind every corner. And she thought of Jack, quiet and solemn, grappling with a burden he could never fully set down. Her eyes welled with tears, not out of overwhelming sadness but from a nuanced gratitude, for the chance to learn, to connect, to see a deeper facet of the man she had loved for so many years. She rose from the bench, inhaling the crisp air as a gentle wind toyed with her hair. At home, she stood in the foyer, gazing at the half-filled boxes. She thought about where she might go next, someplace smaller, perhaps, or maybe she'd travel more. She couldn't decide yet. For now, she simply carried the knowledge that her life, and Jack's, were woven into a tapestry far more complex than she had imagined. And that was all right, she realized. Sometimes, the greatest peace comes not from simple answers but from finally confronting the questions left behind. She walked into the study and found the framed photographs on the desk. Her wedding day, and behind that, the Dresden shot, capturing a fleeting moment of tenderness and risk. Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame, and she exhaled softly, feeling tears gather once more. No final words needed to be spoken. The silence was enough. She had discovered the truth behind those quiet eyes, the weight behind that partial syllable he never managed to voice in his final hours. And in embracing that truth, she discovered a kind of solace that not even he, in his lifetime, had known how to hold. She let the tears fall, letting herself surrender to the mingled sorrow and acceptance that marked this new chapter of her life. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.